The applause started before I even sat back down. Not for me. Never for me that night. It was for my son-in-law's college roommate who had just finished a toast so polished it sounded rehearsed, probably because it was. Everyone laughed at the right moments. Everyone raised their glasses on cue. And I sat there at table 7, the mother of the bride, smiling the way you smile when your cheeks have gone numb. My name is Beverly. I'm 63 years old. And I want to tell you what happened at my daughter's graduation dinner, because I think about it every single day. Not with bitterness, not anymore, but with something that took me a long time to name. Relief, maybe. Or just the plain satisfaction of being seen by the right person at the right moment. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually began, which was not at the dinner. It was 3 years earlier, in the kitchen of the house I'd lived in for 22 years. The night my husband of 31 years told me he was leaving. He didn't say it cruelly. That was almost worse. He said it the way you'd tell someone their flight had been delayed. Matter of fact, a little apologetic, already halfway out the door in his mind. He said he'd been unhappy for a while. He said we'd grown apart. He said all the things people say when they've already made the decision and just need to say the words out loud so the other person can catch up. I was 59 years old. I had been a high school librarian for 26 years. I drove a 10-year-old Subaru. I had a daughter who was 32. A son-in-law named Derek who called me Beverly instead of Mom even after 6 years of marriage. And a savings account that existed mostly in theory. I did not panic. I want to be clear about that because what came next might make it sound like I had a plan. I didn't. I just went very, very quiet. My daughter Aubrey, she's the one this story is about, though not in the way you might expect, called me the week after I told her about the divorce. She asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. She said, "Mom, honestly, this might be a good thing. You can finally relax. You've been working so hard your whole life. You could travel, take up watercolors, something calm." I remember I was standing at the window looking at the backyard. The maple tree we'd planted when Aubrey was 4 had finally gotten big enough to give real shade. "I'm not sure watercolors are really my thing," I said. She laughed a little. "I just mean, don't try to reinvent yourself at this point. You deserve to rest." She was 32. She meant it kindly. I reminded myself of that for a long time. What I didn't tell Aubrey or anyone was that I had been thinking about something for almost 8 years. Since before my husband and I started drifting. Since before the quiet dinners and the separate routines. I had this idea that wouldn't leave me alone. It had started as a small thing. A problem I kept noticing at the library, where kids would come in after school with nowhere to go, and nothing structured to do, and their parents were still at work, and the library was only open until 5. I kept thinking, what if there was a place that stayed open later? That offered tutoring, mentorship, safe space. Not charity, exactly. A real after-school program with structure, with accountability, with people who actually showed up. I had filled 3 notebooks over 8 years with ideas about how it could work. Logistics, funding models, partnerships with local businesses. I had talked to exactly one person about it, a woman I'd met at a library conference in Indianapolis who ran a small nonprofit in Ohio and told me the idea was solid. Then I went home and put the notebooks back in the drawer and didn't think about it again for 2 months. The divorce, strangely, was the thing that finally made me open the drawer again. I spent the first 6 months after he left doing everything I was supposed to do. I found an attorney. I renegotiated. I sold the house, which was painful, and moved into a 2-bedroom rental in a neighborhood I actually liked better. Closer to downtown. Walkable. The kind of place I'd always secretly wanted to live, but somehow never had. I kept working at the library. I went to my book club. I was fine. And then one Sunday morning in February, I took out the notebooks. I want to be honest about what happened next, because people talk about starting something new like it's romantic. Like there's a moment where the clouds part and the path becomes clear. It wasn't like that. It was mostly terrifying. I applied to a small business development program through the community college, the kind designed for people making career transitions, and I was, by a significant margin, the oldest person in the room. The instructor, a man in his early 40s named Todd, was very kind in the way that young people are kind when they're not sure you can keep up. He always explained things twice when he addressed me. I smiled and took notes and said nothing. I had a little money from the house sale. Not a lot, but enough to take a very careful first step. I found a vacant storefront on a street I'd driven past 1,000 times. One of those blocks that's halfway between struggling and coming back, and I signed a short-term lease with a handshake and a prayer. I called it the Linden Project, after the tree. I am not going to pretend it was easy or fast or that I knew what I was doing. There were weeks I ran the whole thing out of my personal checking account. There were nights I sat at a folding table with a laptop and a pile of grant applications and wondered if I had lost my mind. I hired 2 part-time tutors, then 4. I partnered with 2 local elementary schools to send kids our way after dismissal. I applied for a 5-1ZC3 and waited 5 months for the determination letter. I lost a tutor to a full-time job offer and found 2 more through the community college. I wrote a grant for the county library system and got it. I wrote another for a private foundation in Columbus and got that one too. I did not tell Aubrey most of this, not because I was hiding it. I tried a few times. She would ask how I was doing, and I would say, actually, I've been working on something, a nonprofit and after-school program, and her voice would get that careful quality it gets when she's managing me, and she'd say something like, "Oh, that sounds sweet, Mom. Is it keeping you busy?" And I'd say yes, and we'd move on. Her husband Derek worked for a commercial real estate development firm. He managed a team of 12. He had opinions about nonprofit sustainability that he shared at Thanksgiving without anyone asking. I sat across from him and ate my turkey and nodded. My son-in-law's boss, I'll come back to him, was a man named Griffin Calloway. Derek had mentioned him exactly twice in my presence, once to say he was brilliant, and once to say he was the most intimidating man he'd ever worked for. I filed this away and forgot it. The Linden Project turned 2 years old in April. We had 47 kids enrolled. We had 6 staff members, 3 of whom were full-time. We had a partnership with the local hospital's pediatric social work team. We had just been awarded a state grant for $180,000, which was the largest single piece of funding we'd ever received, and which had made me sit on the floor of my office for 10 full minutes when I got the notification. I was 62 years old. I drove a slightly newer Subaru. I still had the apartment downtown, and I had learned to make a very good pot of soup. Aubrey finished her MBA that May. She had started the program part-time while working at a marketing firm downtown, and finishing it was a genuine achievement. She'd worked hard, juggled a lot, and I was proud of her, genuinely. The graduation dinner was Derek's idea. He reserved a private room at a restaurant called the Patterson, which was the kind of place that puts the price on the menu without a dollar sign, and he invited both families, plus a handful of Aubrey and Derek's close friends and colleagues. I wore a dress I'd bought on sale at a department store. It was a dark green that I liked and that my book club friends said maybe looked distinguished. I got there a little early and helped straighten the centerpieces and said hello to Derek's mother, Patricia, who was warm in a distracted way and asked me twice what I'd been up to lately. I said, keeping busy. She nodded and turned to talk to someone else. There were 18 people at the table. I was seated at the far end, between an older woman from Aubrey's graduate cohort whom I'd never met, and Derek's college roommate, whose name I've already forgotten. Derek sat at the head of the table. Aubrey was beside him, radiant in a way she always is when she's being celebrated. The toast started before the entrees arrived. Derek's roommate went first, then Derek's sister, who was funny and a little sharp in a way I liked. Then one of Aubrey's colleagues from the marketing firm. Then Aubrey's best friend since college, a woman named Simone. Simone and I have always had a complicated relationship. That's the most generous way I know how to put it. She loves Aubrey, truly, and I respect that. But there's a quality to her affection that has always felt a little territorial, like she finds it vaguely inconvenient that Aubrey has a mother. I've never said this to anyone except my book club friend, and only once. Simone stood up and clinked her glass and said with that particular smile she has, "I just want to say a few things about the woman we're celebrating tonight." She talked about Aubrey's drive and intelligence and ambition. All true. She talked about how Aubrey had always known exactly what she wanted and gone after it, unlike other people who, and here she paused with that smile, spend their later years on little hobby projects and call it reinvention. There was a beat of silence. Then Aubrey laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a real one. And then several other people laughed too. I felt the blood leave my face. I looked at my water glass. I picked it up and took a sip and set it down. 18 people. I knew some of them were looking at me. I kept my expression the way you keep a window locked in a storm, with effort, and from the inside. Simone kept going. She talked about how Aubrey had a real career, real accomplishments, and didn't need the kind of vague life overhaul that some people confuse with purpose. Another laugh from the table. Aubrey caught my eye for just a moment, and I thought, I still think, she was going to say something, but she looked away. I set my fork down very carefully. I thought about the notebooks in the drawer. I thought about the 47 kids. I thought about the letter on my desk at work from the state. The one that said $180,000. I thought about all of it and I sat there and I did not say one single word. The thing no one ever tells you about being humiliated publicly is how loud the silence is afterward. How you can hear every clink of silverware, every murmured conversation. The way the room settles back into itself like nothing happened because for most of the people in it, nothing did. I ate my salmon. I answered when spoken to. I was fine. Across the table, 3 seats down from Derek, sat a man I hadn't met. He'd arrived a few minutes late and been introduced quickly as Griffin, Derek's boss, the brilliant and intimidating one. He was around my age, maybe a few years older. Silver-haired, with the kind of stillness that comes from being the most powerful person in a room for so long that you no longer need to demonstrate it. He had been quiet through most of the dinner. I'd barely registered him. During Simone's toast, I noticed he had stopped eating. He didn't laugh. When the table laughed, his expression didn't change at all. He looked at Simone, and then he looked at me, and there was something in his face that I couldn't read. Not pity. Not quite. Something more like recognition. After Simone sat down, there was a brief pause in the toasting. People were reaching for their wine, settling into conversation. I was focused on making my face look normal. And then Griffin Calloway picked up his knife and tapped his glass. "If I could," he said. His voice was quiet, but the kind of quiet that makes a room go still. Everyone looked at him. Derek looked alarmed in a way that would have been funny under other circumstances. "I apologize for interjecting," Griffin said. "I don't know everyone at this table well, but I was introduced to Beverly a moment ago." He nodded at me, and I had the absurd sensation of not knowing what to do with my hands. And I realized I should say something. He paused. Not for effect exactly. More like he was deciding how much to say. "About 2 months ago," he said, "the development firm I run was approached about a partnership with a nonprofit called the Linden Project. We do commercial real estate, and they were looking at expanding into a second location. They'd outgrown their current space." He picked up his glass but didn't drink from it yet. "I want to be honest. When my team first brought it to me, I wasn't paying close attention. Nonprofit partnerships in our sector are not uncommon, and they're not always worth the time." Derek had gone very still. "But then I looked at the actual numbers," Griffin continued. "The programming model, the grant history, the state funding they'd just secured, the community impact reports." He set the glass down. "What this organization has built in less than 3 years, with very limited resources, in a sector that is genuinely difficult to navigate, is, in my experience, exceptional. I've been in this business for 30 years. I know what sustainable looks like, and I know what someone running on willpower and wishful thinking looks like. This is not that." He looked at me directly. "I looked up the founder when I started doing due diligence, Beverly Hartman. I saw your name on the grant records, and I didn't connect it to Derek's family. I apologize that I didn't reach out sooner. I think I said something like, 'That's quite all right, but I honestly can't be sure.' I just want to make sure," Griffin said to the table now, "that the people in Beverly's life understand what she has actually been doing these past few years, because from where I sit, it's remarkable." He raised his glass. to Aubrey for her achievement tonight, and to her mother for building something that will matter long after this dinner. The table was very quiet. Not the loud silence from before. A different kind. Aubrey was looking at me. I could see it in my peripheral vision, but I didn't turn toward her yet. I was looking at my water glass, which I had somehow picked up again without realizing it. Simone was not laughing. I raised my glass because someone had to, and I said, "Thank you, Griffin. That's very kind." My voice came out steadier than I expected. The dinner ended not long after. People said their goodbyes, gathered their coats, made plans they probably wouldn't keep. Derek shook Griffin's hand for a beat too long. I hugged Aubrey's colleagues I'd never met and said I was so glad to have been included. Aubrey found me in the parking lot. I was standing by my car, looking for my keys in my purse, which I do every single time even though they are always in the same pocket. "Mom," she said. I looked up. She looked up. She looked, I don't know exactly how to describe it. Not ashamed, exactly, though there was some of that. More like she had been shown something she hadn't known was there. And she was still processing the shape of it. "I didn't know," she said. "About the Linden project. I mean, I knew you were doing something, but I didn't." She stopped. "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about this for a moment. The honest answer was complicated. "I tried," I said. "A few times. It didn't seem like you wanted to hear it." She was quiet. "And," I said, "I think I wanted to know it was real before I showed it to anyone. I wanted to be sure it wasn't just, 'I found my keys.' A hobby project." She flinched. I hadn't meant it as a knife, but it landed like one, and I let it stand because it was true. We hugged in the parking lot, a longer hug than we'd had in a while. She cried a little. I didn't, which surprised me. In the car on the way home, I called my book club friend from the Bluetooth and told her the whole thing. She said, "Beverly Hartman, I have been waiting 3 years for someone to say that out loud." I laughed. "A real one. Here's what I want to say to anyone who is 60, or 62, or 65, and sitting on something they've been told is too late or too small or too much of a reinvention. The people who love you are not always the right people to tell first. Sometimes you have to build the thing in the dark, in the drawer, in the quiet, until it's real enough to survive being seen." I am not angry at Aubrey. I want to be clear about that. She was repeating things she'd absorbed from everywhere, from a culture that treats ambition after 60 like a symptom of something, from a world that quietly tells women to take up watercolors and rest. She didn't invent those ideas. She just forgot for a little while that I hadn't agreed to them. We've been to therapy together, Aubrey and I. 3 sessions so far. It is awkward and uncomfortable, and I think it's working. She asked me last week if she could come see the Linden project sometime. I said yes, but I made her schedule it. I needed her to actually show up. She did. She brought Derek. He shook hands with my staff and looked at the programming schedule and didn't say anything about nonprofit sustainability. He said it was impressive. I thanked him. The Linden Project signed a letter of intent with Griffin Calloway's development firm 3 weeks ago. We are moving into a space 3 times the size of our current one, with room for a computer lab and a second tutoring floor. We'll be able to serve 90 kids by fall. I drove home that night and parked in my spot and sat in the car for a minute before going inside. The street was quiet. A neighbor's dog was walking his owner around the block. The maple trees along the sidewalk, not my maple, the city's, but close enough, were just starting to turn. I am 63 years old. I drive a slightly newer Subaru. I run an organization I built from 3 notebooks and a hunch, and it turns out that hunch was right. I do not take up watercolors. Not yet, anyway. I've thought a lot about why I didn't defend myself that night. When Simone stood up and said what she said, I had every fact I needed sitting right there in my head. The grant letters, the state funding, the 47 kids, the staff I'd hired, the lease I'd signed on a wing and a prayer. I could have said any of it. I chose not to. Some people would call that weakness. I used to wonder if they were right. But here's what I've come to understand. There is a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue at dinner tables or try to win the room. It just keeps building, quietly, until the building does the talking. That's not passivity. It takes more discipline than most people realize to sit with your hands in your lap and your spine straight and let someone be wrong about you in public without correcting them. It requires a very specific kind of trust. Not in luck, not in fate, but in the work itself. Simone said what she said because she genuinely believed it. That's the part I had to sit with longest. She wasn't performing cruelty for the audience. She had looked at me, a 62-year-old woman in a department store dress, driving a 10-year-old Subaru, working out of a storefront, and she had made a reasonable assumption based on what she could see. The tragedy wasn't malice, it was a failure of imagination. She couldn't picture what I was building because she had already decided what I was capable of, and Aubrey laughed. I know. I've thought about that too. She wasn't trying to wound me. She was doing what people do when they're in a room where a joke lands. She went along with it. She trusted Simone's read of the situation more than she trusted her own knowledge of her mother. That's its own kind of thing, and we've talked about it and we're still talking. What I keep coming back to is this. The choices we make when no one is watching are the ones that eventually speak for us in rooms full of people. I spent 3 years filling notebooks, rewriting grant applications, learning things I had no business thinking I could learn at my age. Nobody gave me credit for that time. Nobody saw it. I didn't do it so that Griffin Calloway would stand up at a dinner and say my name with respect. I did it because the 47 kids were real, and the problem was real, and I was the person who was going to do something about it, or no one was. The cause and the consequence are not always tidy. Sometimes you do the right thing and the room never finds out. Sometimes the room finds out at exactly the wrong moment, which turns out to be exactly the right one. I don't think I deserved what happened that night in some cosmic accounting sense. I think I had simply done enough real work that the truth had weight. And when Griffin picked up his knife and tapped his glass, all that weight came into the room at once. Aubrey asked me later why I'd kept it quiet for so long. The honest answer is that I needed to know it was real before anyone else did. I needed to be able to look at it without the noise of other people's doubts, or their enthusiasm, which can be just as distracting. There is something to be said for building in the dark, not because secrecy is noble, but because some things need to be strong enough to survive being seen before you let them be seen. I'm 63. I run something that matters. And I finally make a very good pot of soup. That's enough. It turns out it's more than enough.